When a company like TMX Group, we're talking the engine behind Canada's stock market, puts out its earnings report, it's way more than just numbers on a page. It's really a snapshot of the economy's health, and it gives us a peek into the future of finance. So today, we're going to unpack the story behind their absolutely record-breaking year, the big strategic hurdles they're looking at, and what it all means for you. Okay, let's just start with the number that leaps right off the page, 18%. Look, in a world where established financial exchanges are happy with single-digit growth, an 18% jump year over year is, well, it's a massive deal. This isn't just a good quarter, it's a real statement, and it pretty much sets the stage for this entire story. But revenue? That's only half the picture. The bottom line is, honestly, even more impressive. A 25% jump in earnings per share, that shows this wasn't just about getting bigger. It was about getting a whole lot more profitable. This is exactly the kind of growth that makes investors really sit up and pay attention. So, how do we even sum up 2025 for TMX Group? I think there's only one word for it: historic. Seriously, this wasn't just a good year, it was a record-breaking one. In the CEO's own words, it was their best year ever. And here it is, straight from CEO John McKenzie. He's not just celebrating the numbers here. He's pointing to the strategy behind them, the key contributing factors. This tells you this wasn't some lucky break. No, this was a plan in action. And here we go. This is probably the ultimate sign of confidence. A 9% dividend increase. That's TMX basically telling the market, hey, this wasn't a one-off. We expect this kind of performance to stick around. It's a direct reward to shareholders, for sure, but it's also a really bold statement about the future. All right, so that leads to the big question, right? How did they do it? What were the real engines driving this incredible growth? Let's pop the hood and take a look. Yeah, this was not a solo act. The growth was more like a symphony, with every single part of the business playing a crucial role. You had the high-speed world of derivatives trading, the super smart data insights from Betify and Trayport, and of course, the core business of helping companies raise money. Every single engine was firing on all cylinders. Let's just zoom in on one of those engines for a sec. Derivatives. An 80% jump in ETF options volume. I mean, that is just staggering. What that tells us is that in a pretty volatile market, investors were flocking to TMX's products to manage their risk and find new opportunities. That is a very powerful place to be. Now, for another key engine, capital formation. A 53% surge in financing for the mining sector. In Canada, that's a huge deal. It's a sign that a real backbone of the Canadian economy is strong, and it shows that companies are confident enough to pour money back into the future. Okay, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Every silver lining has a cloud, right? And in this story, that cloud was the rising cost of all this success. Let's flip the coin over and look at the other side. So, it's a classic balancing act. On one side, you've got this incredible record-breaking revenue. But on the other, you've got rising costs. Now, this was a mix of strategic investments, hiring more people, upgrading technology, plus a one-time regulatory charge. It's that age-old story, right? You gotta spend money to make money. And that brings us to the final act of our story, the future. With a record year in the rearview mirror, TMX is now looking at a landscape that's being totally reshaped by things like AI, tokenization, and this constant push for 24-hour trading. So how does a legacy institution like this not just survive, but actually thrive in this brand new world? Well, here's their game plan. They call it purpose-driven innovation. Basically, they're not just chasing every new shiny trend. They're trying to solve actual problems. For TMX, the question isn't, is this new and cool? It's, does this actually make the market better, fairer, and more transparent for everyone? Now, one of those big buzzwords you hear all the time is tokenization. Let's just break that down real quick. All it means is creating a digital version of a real-world asset, think of a stock or a bond, and putting it on a blockchain. Now, in theory, this could completely revolutionize how we trade and manage assets. But this is where TMX's cautious, steady approach really comes into play. The CEO sees the huge potential, but he's laser-focused on the practical hurdles, like regulation and standardization. The message they're sending is pretty clear. They'd much rather get it right than be the first ones out of the gate. And then you've got this whole 24-hour trading dilemma. Sure, it sounds great for the global giants, But what about all the small and medium-sized businesses that are really the lifeblood of the Canadian economy? TMX is worried that round-the-clock trading could actually make it harder for those smaller companies to get the attention and the investment they need to grow. It's a classic Main Street versus Bay Street problem. So after all that, what's the big takeaway here? When you put all the pieces together, the amazing performance, the rising costs, the challenges on the horizon, what does the TMX story really tell us about what's next? You can really boil this whole narrative down into 3 simple steps. First, unbelievable performance across the entire business. Second, financial prudence. They managed the costs that came along with all that success. And third, careful preparation for what's coming next, always putting the integrity of the market ahead of the hype. Performance, prudence, preparation. That, right there, is the story of TMX's 2025. And that leaves us with this one final, really critical question. TMX Group has proven it can perform at the absolute highest level, but in a world that's being remade by technology at lightning speed, the ultimate test is all about transformation. Can an established leader, a legacy institution, adapt quickly enough to not just keep up, but to actually